I'm ready when you are.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome, Earthlings. So this session is being recorded. My name is Marek Oziewicz. I'm the editor-in-chief of Climate Lit, and I'm also the Henry Professor of Children's Literature at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. This is our first event in 2022 at Climate Lit. Climate Lit is an online resource for building universal climate literacy with children's literature and media. And at the heart of the project is a database of books, films, games, all narrative media that are useful for teaching climate literacy. And one important feature of Climate Lit is climate panels and climate conversations. So events like today's event. And the goal is to explore big ideas at the heart of storytelling and the challenges that define climate literacy for the 21st century, what we can do as teachers, educators, parents, adults in terms of helping build universal climate literacy, helping young people become climate literate. And today's event with Antonio Lopez is our first event, the focus in this year, and the focus is on ecomedia literacy in our lives and classrooms. Behind the screen and monitoring the chat is Nick Cleese, and co-hosting this panel, this conversation with me is Alex Panos. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Marek. Hello, everyone. So pleased to be with you here today as well. I hope you are each finding some measure of equilibrium right now. Again, my name is Alex Panos. I'm an assistant professor of literacy studies at the University of South Florida. And to begin today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Antonio Lopez. He is a chair and associate professor of communications and media studies at John Cabot University in Rome, and a leading international specialist of media literacy education. With a research focus on bridging sustainability with media literacy, he is currently one of the top global experts in the emerging field of ecomedia literacy. He is the author of 4 books and numerous other publications on the intersections of sustainability and media literacy. And his most recent book is Ecomedia Literacy, Integrating Ecology into Media Education. As a producer of dozens of youth media projects, Antonio has collaborated with MacArthur Foundation, National Center for Preservation of Democracy, Action Coalition for Media Education Summit, National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, and the National Rural Health Organization. You can find more about his work at his website, antonio-lopez.com. And Antonio, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really enjoyed the book. Our plan is to give Antonio some time to talk with us about his book and his experiences thinking about ecomedia literacy. And then Marek and I might have some questions for him, and we hopefully will also be able to pose questions that you all might have. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you. Antonio, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Italy, and it's evening here, so welcome from our aperitivo moment. And I just want to welcome everyone to this event. I appreciate you joining us. I see that there's also some familiar faces in attending, so hello to all my friends who are here as well. Thank you for coming. So my plan was to give you like a little bit of an overview of the main topic and themes that I cover in the book, but I don't want to get into too much detail because I'm actually very interested to have a conversation with the participants. This is part of an effort to try to be transdisciplinary, because I'm coming more from the field of media studies, and I really admire the work that's being done with Climate Lit and the focus on children's literature and young adult literature and so forth. And that's not necessarily a field that I'm familiar with, although I have teenage kids, so I know what kids are like and I know what they're interested in. But I very much want to have a dialogue across fields and across disciplines. So I'm not really here to tell you the truth of anything except to share with you my particular perspective. So my ideal is that I maybe speak for about 15, 20 minutes at the most, and then I want to interact with all of you. So let me do a screen share here. We can find, there we go. So if anyone has any problems seeing the screen, please speak up, but you should be able to see the PowerPoint now. So maybe I talk just for a second about the cover of the book, which I'm so happy about. And it relates to some of the themes that are important for what I talk about in the book. So that image actually was produced by NASA. They have an artist in residence, and every year they do a big poster for Earth Day. And it was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And they made this wonderful hybrid image of a satellite photo and a painting of a heart. And when I showed it to the publisher and asked if we could use it for the cover, they of course wanted to make sure that we had the permission to use it. And so what is exciting and interesting is that, you know, anything that NASA produces is part of the public domain because it's paid for by the taxpayers, and therefore the public is allowed to use anything as long as we don't resell it or use it for commercial purposes. And so I was able to get permission to use the image. And I think that's an important theme in terms of sharing knowledge and scholarship about the field that we're in terms of trying to address environmental difficulties and climate change, et cetera, is the importance of having open access to knowledge and to be able to exchange ideas and to not, you know, be locked behind paywalls, et cetera. So I try to work whenever possible to share information to the fullest extent, to promote a kind of like a commons as much as possible, an Ecomedia Commons, which I write about in the book. So moving on, I want to just give you a very brief definition. I think a lot of you probably, this won't be new, but maybe some of the terminology is unfamiliar. There's a new emerging field of ecomedia studies that's been, it's not even fully codified yet. This is something that's been developing over the past 20 years. I mean, I think the roots of it go back farther, but there's a certain scholarship that's more and more being identified as ecomedia studies. And in fact, I'm co-editing a book, a handbook on ecomedia studies, which will be the first of its kind, which is trying to sort of define a little bit what the parameters of this is. So ecomedia is, if we define it very simply, it's just media that are understood as a part of and about the environment. So of being the material aspects of media, that it comes from the earth, you know, the minerals, all the elements that we use to make our gadgets and our computers and construct our systems and our infrastructure. For media are of the earth, and then media, of course, as I was talking about in Ecomedia Commons, is a discursive space where we negotiate and develop and debate and tell stories about the environment. And then ecomedia literacy is basically taking that sort of that turn, you know, to apply eco to media, to have that ecomedia, to have that ecological awareness about media, and then hybridize that and complement it with media literacy, which has some very useful tools for helping people analyze and deconstruct media, but in particular, critical media literacy, which is more of the realm of media literacy, because there's media literacy is a very diverse movement with different perspectives, and the perspective I'm operating out of is aligned with critical media literacy. So the primary object of analysis in the framework that I've developed is what I call the ecomedia object. And there's 4 different types of ecomedia objects. There's a representational media text, which is the most common thing that we analyze in media studies and also in media literacy. But then there's also like a platform. A platform could be a website, it could be an operating system, it could be, Amazon, for example, is a platform, Facebook is a platform, and then a gadget, which could be a phone, a computer, a tablet, anything that's sort of, you can hold it, an electronic device. And then a hyperobject, which is something you can't hold, you can't really touch it. It's amorphous and it's abstract. And that allows us to analyze things like the internet or some kind of system or the political ecology of some kind of media organization as a media object, ecomedia object, that is. And then over the years, I've developed this approach where quite often, when you study media in a typical or classical media studies environment, or even in probably literature as well, you primarily focus on the text. And that's good and that's important, but I felt that it was incomplete. And I was quite influenced through various different experiences and exposure to other fields and systems thinking to understand that, the media object is more than just the text. And I came to develop this framework where we sort of have 4 different ways to analyze, or 4 different perspectives that you can apply to the ecomedia object. So the first being ecoculture, which has to do with discourses and beliefs and symbols, things that we understand collectively through shared knowledge. And then political ecology, which is a slight turn on, usually political economy would be the study of the relationship between private organizations, the public, and government policy. And political ecology is similar, except that it extends those concerns to talk about the environment. And then ecomaterialism, which is to focus on the material characteristics of the ecomedia object, which would be, how it's made, what it's made of, the minerals, the actual production process. And then life world, which is the phenomenological affective experience of the person who's engaging the material, what's going on with their sensory experience, their cognitive response. And so I have some little images here to sort of represent different examples of ecomedia objects. It could be an advertisement text, it could be a technology like radio, it could be a book, or like a children's book in the case of Climate Lit, a gadget, news, etc. And this heuristic that I developed, I call the ecomedia sphere. And then, so that's one approach I use to perform sort of a holistic analysis. And then the other one that I'm working on is this icebergs model of systems dynamics. Actually, I should change that to systems thinking, which some of you might be familiar with. So if you come out of the field of education for sustainability, or some of the other disciplines that are involved with trying to understand environmental problems, they use this model as a way of thinking about solving problems, not just identifying them, but solving them. And I won't go into too much detail, but I'll just sort of give you the overview. So it's called the iceberg because part of it is only visible, which is usually called the event. So this would refer to, typically when this is applied, it's often used when they talk about, like, let's say a hurricane or forest fire. That's the event, that's the thing that happened. But then you want to look at what are the underlying causes of these events. Well, in my thinking, when we apply to media, the event is the media. It's the manifestation in that moment that we come in contact with it. And so what we want to understand is what is our reaction to that object. And then from the ecomedia literacy perspective, in our reaction, our response to the object, we want to look at its form, its aesthetics, its materiality, its sensory and affective impacts, or how we respond to it, its medium properties. And then go below the system and you look at patterns and trends. And that is the goal. The aim here is to anticipate. If you observe the pattern, something keeps happening over and over again, you start to see that there's a certain structure to why this. So for example, stereotypes of gender or race could be examples of certain pattern that reoccurs over and over again. So you want to map this, and then in eco-critical perspective or eco-criticism, this would be the realm where you sort of map out discourses or particular, or if you're doing news analysis, certain kind of frames that reoccur over and over again, or narratives, or sort of repeated symbolic representations that happen over and over again. And then below that, you have systemic structures, and this is where the system is designed. So in this case, I identify political economy or political ecology as sort of the structure of these patterns emerge out of that structure. So then you want to understand what is the structure that's reproducing these things over and over again, because the aim would be, if you want to solve this problem, is to redesign, to design something new. But of course, the design of the system comes ultimately from our mental models or from our knowledge systems. So to get at the very root, if you really want to change something, you really want to solve the problem, the aim is to really go deep as possible to understand what is the worldview that's producing this whole system, that's projecting this thing and materializing it out into the world. So by using this method of sort of going from the surface and deeper, 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 the more we understand something, the more we can try to, we can propose solutions to try to solve the problem. And I would argue that, most media literacy operates at the level of events and patterns. They just kind of focus on the individual text without really connecting it to larger patterns. And occasionally, good media literacy does get to sort of a deeper level to recognize that certain things occur over and over again. For example, stereotypes, like I mentioned. And then, critical media studies, which is one of the few aspects of areas of media literacy, critical media literacy, is one of the few that really, goes into the actual systemic structures. What are the economic motives of the media organizations that reproduce or promote, disinformation, fake news, or negative stereotypes, things like that. So I think I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but just for the sake of being consistent and to have a baseline. When I talk about ecomedia, I divide it into two areas. There's the ecomedia footprint, or its ecological footprint, and then the mind print, which I'll show in the next slide. And I give some various examples here, and I'll probably go fairly quickly, but the images connect to, like, for example, with the little phones and the guns, that has to do with conflict minerals and the fact that the minerals that are used for our devices tend to come from conflict zones, like in the Congo, that generate war. And I put the gorilla image there because when the PlayStation 2 came out in the early 2000s, there was kind of a gold rush for tantalum and cobalt and different metals that they needed for the PlayStation in the Congo. And they were mining in this natural preserve, and the gorilla population before the PlayStation 2 was at something like 17,000. And after the production run of the PlayStation, I'm talking about the device that you buy to bring in your home, there was only 7,000 gorillas left. So it was like an actual impact on the biodiversity of the region as a result of this device that people were consuming all over the world. And then electronic waste is another big problem. I have an image in the bottom here related to the cloud and the fact that the energy that's used to power all of our data in our system primarily comes from fossil fuels. And so the internet and increasingly Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, NFTs, artificial intelligence are really driving energy consumption because they require tremendous amounts of processors and computer power to create all that data. So this is a big problem, and luckily people are recognizing that. In fact, I think I saw a news item the other day in Kosovo. They had to shut down Bitcoin because the farms that were mining Bitcoins, server farms or server mines, I don't know what the correct term is, was putting such a strain on the power grid that they weren't able to provide power for the rest of the population. I have an image from Goodbye Ice Slave, which is a very important book by a Chinese researcher on the exploitation of labor. So labor is very much a part of the ecological footprint, which has to do with the biopolitics and the control of people's bodies and the exploitation of people's life force, essentially. And then last but not least, electromagnetic energy, which is it's not as reported or discussed because I don't think anyone really wants to deal with it because we all so much depend on our phones. But there is a lot of evidence, at least, that suggests we need to understand better what is the impact of all this wireless energy on our physiology, but also on other animals. And then the ecological mind print, just very quickly, 3 areas. One is on our political discourses and how we try to resolve issues and formulate policy about like climate change, for example. The other one would have to do with how it drives consumerism through advertising and the primary business model of media, which is marketing and advertising. And then the impact of our devices on our sense of place, space, and time, which is something that environmental educators care quite a bit about. So just really quickly, this whole system of production for our gadgets is very much dependent on the worldview of extractivism, or extractivism is part of the worldview of capitalism, I should say. And without sort of this global system where we have to extract minerals for our devices, whether it's lithium for the batteries or conflict minerals like cassiterite, wolframite, coltan, gold, or copper, aluminum, plastics, etc. And oil for energy or gas, or mega projects that produce electricity so we can run our devices, are justified through this neo-colonial model of extractivism, where essentially foreign powers, you might have a local power that controls the extraction, but it's the foreign power that's directing it either through banking or international finance or et cetera. Excuse me. And that would not be made possible unless we had this belief in disposable populations, that certain populations can be sacrificed for the global economy. So all the places, whether it's for e-waste or for the extraction of the materials or the pollution of the industries that make the chemicals and plastics for our products, would not be enabled or possible unless there was sort of underlying racism in the system that designates these sacrifice zones and these disposable populations. I just want to draw your attention to, I've been, looking a lot at sort of a Native American critique of capitalism in our system. And one of the things that came up, which I thought was quite useful from this book, The Red Deal, which is a fairly radical critique even of the Green Deal, Green New Deal, that is, which is to sort of frame the problem of sort of 2 different attitudes or beliefs about what is the term critical infrastructure, which was something we hear of quite a bit and came up quite a bit in some of our political debates over some of Biden's proposals for Bring Back Better. And critical infrastructure usually refers to pipelines and the whole production chain from extraction to the market. And what they talk about is that critical infrastructure and then infrastructures of relations are both have methodologies of relationships, but they have different attitudes about or certain different worldview of what that relationship means. So in the case of the way that critical infrastructure is thought in sort of our political ecology of the current capitalist system, the methodology of relationality is money and destruction. That's what primarily drives relationships with the land, with people, and so forth. And what they want to get back to and to revive is this idea of infrastructure of relations, in which caretaking and balance is the primary ethic that underlies, how we formulate our policies. And so they talk about engaging people in eco-citizenship, which is to take action. And the sort of underlying core ethic of that is taking responsibility and being a good relative. And being a good relative means a good relative between among humans, but also good relatives with the more than human world, with the mineral world, the animal world, the plant world, and also future intergenerational justice, you know, with 7 generations from now. So the goal of my work is to try to transform our understanding of media from sort of classic traditional concept of media to ecomedia, where we understand media is embedded, sort of that has this ecological impact. And then also to transition from sort of a system based on anthropocentric belief systems to one that is based on ecocentric perspective. So I want to stop talking in a few minutes because I see we're already almost a half hour into this, and I just want to show you some examples of student work, and then I'll stop so we can have a discussion. So some of the kind of things that students can do in interacting with this sort of framework. This is an information graphic that shows the linear production chain of gadgets that one student made. This is some project that I was working on with some students. I want to expand it. It needs, I think, a little bit more attention. But to use this is from Padlet. They have this map where you can sort of insert on the map locations where things happen, and I want them to sort of map out how our gadgets and how media is produced all over the world. And this is something students could do. I also use Padlet for students to gather information and share resources, and then do a group blog in which they share their research and they write blog posts about it. Another student made this wonderful comic. And then I've been using video essays as an assignment tool where students, if you're not familiar with video essays, they are like written essays, but in a video form. So it has empirical evidence, it has an argument, it has a theoretical framework, but it's very educational because we're able to sort of see the material that's being analyzed. It's very visual and sound based, and it's quite wonderful. It works really well. And then you can use Prezi, and this is a template I found. There's an iceberg model template in Prezi, so you could actually have students do like a multimedia interactive analysis where they can sort of start filling out the information from the iceberg method into the Prezi, and then of course share that with their classmates. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here. These were some questions. I noticed that Jeff Scher is in the audience. Hello, Jeff. And we did a presentation together, and we came up with some questions like these in one of our conferences that we worked together, presented at. And these are kind of maybe I'm sure you all have a lot of your own questions, but if you just to stimulate your thinking a little bit, like, what is one idea or theme that resonates with your own work as a media literacy educator, or in your case, if you're literacy teachers? How would you apply environmental justice to teaching media literacy? So environmental justice, I didn't use that word, but when I was talking about the disposable population, sacrifice zones, extraction economy, the idea is, environmental justice is to bring attention and awareness to that and to stop these exploitative behaviors. And then what kinds of activities can students do, and how can we mobilize media literacy, or in your case, if you're just in the literature field, to address eco-justice and to sort of help solve, or in the case of the Climate Lit website, the climate crisis. So I'm gonna stop sharing there, and I would like to open it up to all of you for questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Antonio. That was fantastic. We have one question in the Q&A space box, but and we will have definitely time for this. But some of the things you shared in this presentation really resonate with some of our ideas that Alex and I generated, like reading your book, thinking about these ideas. So how about if we start with Alex, maybe one question from you, then one from me, and then take it over, then the question from Kirsten, and open it up.
That sounds great. Thanks, Marek. And thank you, Antonio, for breaking down so much of the rich conceptual framing and concepts and terms in in your book was really helpful, and I appreciate it. I guess the thing that I was left thinking a lot about is how much of the book and your work seems to center the historical and cultural context and material composition of ecomedia. You just spent a lot of time talking about it. As we think about how to interact with media and in our everyday lives and in our pedagogy, this just seems so important, and also can be kind of complicated to bring into classroom space. So I wanted to hear if you could speak a little bit about the imperative of ecomedia literacy in terms of its ethical and justice dimensions and impacts on, in particular, communities of color, Indigenous communities, women, and those who have been geographically disenfranchised or displaced, and how you found inroads when you bring that into your classroom work.
Great, thank you. So I think the best way to answer that is to explain why I started doing this work in the first place, which is about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. I had been working in the media business. I was a journalist. I did other film work, things like that. And because of a health crisis, I had to take a break and reevaluate the kind of work I was doing. And I decided to enter into education, partly because I realized, all my grandparents were professors and educators. And it kind of skipped a generation, but I kind of had the bug. And so I felt this need to share at least what I had been learning from working in the media with young people, but I didn't quite know how to do that. And I think my entree into education was through media literacy, and I got really turned on to it because, my deep background, going back to when I was a teenager, was that I was in the punk scene in LA, and we made zines and we were kind of active media makers. So I was always kind of had this sort of radical pedagogy anyways about like do it yourself or do it with others, and make your own media and democratizing media. So when I got turned on to media literacy around 20 years ago, which is sort of when it started to take off in the US, I got really energized. And at the same time, I was working with Native American high school students, and a lot of the projects that we did were very environmentally or ecologically oriented. And I kept seeing that there was kind of a disconnection between the Native American worldview and the worldview of media education and media studies. There was like an epistemological difference, or I would say even an ontological difference. And I can't remember if I wrote about this in this particular book, but if I was out in the field with the teenagers, and we would have elders with us, we'd be in the forest, and I would have a crew of kids. We were filming stuff, and they say, don't film that rock, or don't film that mountain. And it didn't make sense to me, but to them, it was logical, because those things were sacred, and you should not objectify them through media. So you may have heard that sort of cliche of Native Americans would say that photography steals your soul. I don't think they literally say that your soul is sucked in through the camera, but I think there was some insight there that media makes us vain and self-conscious and egotistical and individualized, and how media objectifies everything, and they sort of understood that very early on. And so I kept finding this disconnection between the worldview of the Native communities I was working in, and then what was going on sort of in the Western academic realm that I was sort of navigating. And so it was through that disconnection that I pursued my PhD research to try to understand. So the other issue was that I noticed that media literacy had nothing about the environment. I mean, zero. I was kind of shocked. I was doing more and more stuff around environmental issues, and I literally nothing. I mean, maybe one or two brief mentions here and there. And I was kind of baffled by that, because I knew that people who teach media literacy probably care about the environment, but it's like, where is it? So that invited me to do a deep understanding of like, what is it about media studies and the study of media that has this big blind spot? And what I came to realize is that I think that in the Western tradition of modernity, that there's this idea that media belong to the realm of sort of the mental and the realm of ideas that are not physical, that they're not part of our bodies. So therefore, they don't have a physicality. So when people think about media, they think of it as sort of just something that's like thoughts, and that thoughts are immaterial. And I think that sort of belief carries into the general culture, and most people are not aware that all media have materiality to it. And so the point of developing this curriculum and this approach is to bring that back, is to revive it. And there are a lot of interesting areas of, like, environmental humanities, and there's a whole material turn going on in philosophy and in media studies. So I'm not the only person who was aware of this, but so what I try to do is bring that stuff in to at least my realm of practitioners. Thankfully, I have some allies that I'm working with in the media literacy world to try to develop this approach. But it hasn't been easy. It's not popular, and I still find it generally not accepted. There's a little bit of a space that we're sort of inserting ourselves in, but I don't see it at the forefront. And part of my research was I found that a lot of the if you go to any media literacy organization, they always have these principles or these sort of questions that you can ask, and sort of frameworks on how to do analysis. And it's never anything about the environment or about materiality. And so, we're trying to change that. So the methodology that I try to offer in the book is an attempt to do that. But, as we were talking about before this meeting, the book I wrote is kind of maybe it's too long. There's too much stuff there, but I kind of had to put it all out there so there was a reference point. And I think there needs to be more materials developed that simplify and sort of help teachers, like, okay, here's how you teach it, like the iceberg, but break it down into lessons and break it into sort of a set of questions, and sort of have a methodology that any teacher could use, which that needs to be developed. And I'm, hope if there's any allies in this meeting that want to help me work on that, that's fantastic. I'm really here also to help find people to join and to participate, because I certainly cannot do this by myself. There's no way. I'm pretty tired. I'm getting old. So we need some young people to jump in there and help out. So there is a website that I'm working on. I'm been gotten some funding. I need a little bit more to sort of work on the programming, but it's ecomedialiteracy.org. And the idea is to have a free resource that any teacher can use that has lessons. Anyone can create a lesson. It'll be a simple template, like a form where you fill it out. And if you're a teacher and you're like, oh, I want to do environment in my literature class or my media class, I have no idea how to do this. You go to this website. There's already going to be a bunch of media examples there. I've already built it out a lot. And there'll be lessons where how to teach about climate stories, or how to teach about environmental ideology, et cetera. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did. And I know I wanted to reiterate how much I appreciated that you started and like grounded this work in the ethical and justice components, because I don't think it's possible to separate, but that connecting it to like what we do and how we support folks in the process is just so important. So thank you for that. Marek, I'll let you jump in there.
Yes, thanks, Alex. Thanks, Antonio. I had like 22 different questions that I like prepared for this conversation, but you already answered some of these in your presentation, like this distinction between live print and mind print, which is a very, very productive structure. But I wanted to start with maybe a very simple question, because, and I don't know if this is my misunderstanding of your book or if it's there, but like I'm still grappling with it. Like, so on the one hand, you're saying that we have this sort of dominant idea of media, what media is. And then you're proposing this new concept of ecomedia. But then you're also sort of subverting this distinction by saying that, well, in fact, all media are ecomedia because all of them have this mind print and all of them have this footprint. that is actually material, that in terms of resources, in terms of modes of production, in terms of how it operates on these different levels of this iceberg metaphor. So I was wondering maybe if you can talk a little bit more about, like, do we have ecomedia versus like some other media, and like how do we think about this distinction, or if all media are ecomedia, but maybe ecomedia are explicit about being embedded in materiality of the world, and media is pretending that we're sort of separate in this idealistic zone of thought only. Like, can you talk about this a little more?
Yeah, so I have two ways to respond to this. Let me come at it from the idea of like the concept of an environmentalist. So part of the problem with our culture is that we sort of tack on and sort of separate these different things so that, oh, here environmentalism belongs over here, that it's not integrated into the rest of society. So, when people call me an environmentalist, I actually get a little bit annoyed because I'm like, well, we're all environmentalists because we all have beliefs about the environment. But I understand. I mean, I don't criticize people when they say that, but we're all environmental beings, but our culture is structured in such a way that we have to sort of label things and then put them in their silos. So I'd rather not use the term ecomedia because I think, like you say, all media are ecomedia, but I have to do that to distinguish how to do that turn, to add the eco there is to bring the awareness to the fact that all media are ecomedia. So I wouldn't say like, there actually, it's a good point because I think you look at some literature, people do write ecomedia as like only media about the environment, and that it's a particular genre of media that's environmental. And I don't mean that at all. I mean, all media are ecomedia because all media come from the environment or part of the environment, and they all have beliefs about the environment. And this is very much influenced by the work of David Orr, who some of you may be familiar with, the environmental educator and theorist, who said all education is environmental education. And what he meant by that is, if you go to school as a kid and you never talk about or study the environment, that's a lesson about the environment. The fact that you're not talking about it means that it's not important, and that you're teaching someone through its absence. In media, we might use the term symbolic annihilation. That if we don't represent something, then therefore we don't consider it worthy of representation. And one thing that David Orr talks about is that education, well-meaning, liberal education, trains people to vandalize the planet. But if you don't talk about it, then those behaviors get perpetuated. And so my use of ecomedia is just a linguist or a metaphor to sort of draw people's attention to it. But I would be happy to abandon it. We can just use the term media, but my experience is that when people teach media, the whole environmental piece of it is completely missing. So by using ecomedia, I'm just trying to bring it back, and maybe someday either we only use the word ecomedia or we go back to use the word media, but it incorporates the awareness of the ecological dimension of media.
Yes, thank you. This is, I know there are fragments in your book where you also talk about like this symbolic mobility that media, affords us, and then, how not only the like material components of media, but like the way that they take us places and allow us to be or see or participate vicariously in certain things, that this is also a process of being embedded and connected, in the environment, connected to these things that are maybe not often they are not our immediate things. So yes, thank you. This is a wonderful explanation. We have two questions in the Q&A box. So maybe we should start with the first one. Kirsten asks, thanks so much for this engaging presentation. My question is regarding the life world. You mentioned that this aspect is connected to the embodied effectual response to the media object. And I'm curious how you have measured and explored this. How does the incorporation of this perspective add to the critical ecomedia discourse?
Okay, yeah, great question. Because that's probably the most difficult aspect of this approach. But, literature studies has a lot about affect. And one element of affect, especially, eco-literature studies, is, the fact that when you read a book about something, it transports you, and you actually, like if you read about a smell or a sound, you actually embody that, and you model that, your brain through its cognitive abilities to mirror neurons and all that kind of stuff. You actually physically have the experience of being in a place through reading it, or likewise seeing a movie. If you watch a lot of people who saw Avatar were deeply affected by being in that environment of that alien world. That's affective because it's your body's emotionally and you're having a sensory response to it. So one activity I do with my students is, well, first thing is I remind them that all media start as sensory experience, right? It's not, media does not start as an idea. It's a sound wave, it's light, photons. I mean, these are things literally that touch our body. And all media starts from nerve stimulation. This is probably a very important insight we get from McLuhan and the School of Media Ecology, that all media are sensory experience. So the example I often use is you go to a movie theater and you see a trailer for the next Marvel movie, and it's 5 minutes of and I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. My brain gets scrambled, and physically, I'm it's where does that come from? It's not because I intellectualized about what I'm seeing. It's because my senses are getting overwhelmed by sound and by light and by edits and all this stuff. And there's not enough discussion, especially in media literacy, about our cognitive response. And so when I talk about affect, it's first, at the base, it's what is your sensory response, and then what is your emotional response. And we don't talk, also in the Western tradition, we don't talk so much about emotion, but that emotions are very much associated with the body. So we sort of separate that again with this mind-body duality. And also in patriarchy, that women are associated with this emotions, men are associated with rationality. All these sort of binaries that Western culture produced are reproduced in the way that we teach media and think about media. So I do exercises where I try to draw attention to how, I don't know if you can go on the internet and find, I can't remember the exact term, it's in my book, but you can find negative images of color photographs. And if you stare at it for 20 seconds and then you look away on the wall, you see the positive version emerges in the space, because your photons have been stimulated by all the light. And then when you look away, the photons in the back of your, the cones in your eye are vibrating because of all the light that stimulated them. And so you see these images floating in space, or it's after image. If you stare at a light and you close your eyes, that's an example of nerve stimulation that's being caused by the light that's stimulating your eyes. So just to draw awareness to how media impact our sensory experience, and then the ideas, and then we connect through the various mechanisms of how we construct reality. We take that sensory experience and we assemble it into a preconceived understanding of how the world works. And if you study Buddhism and meditation, you can learn more about that as well, how your brains work and things like that. But I'm very much interested in mindfulness and these kind of things. So if I would suggest, again, I have a whole section in the book about this, but to explore affect, you can explore it through mindfulness and some of these other things I was talking about.
Thank you.
We have a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Judith asked if you know the book by Guillaume Pitron, L'Enfer numérique, published in 2021 in French.
I don't. And hi, Judith. Nice to see you. Unfortunately, I don't speak French, but I know there's a lot of really amazing French scholarship. And since we're friends on Facebook, please send that to me, and let me know if there's an English translation, because I think that would be great. I trust your taste, by the way.
And then Rick Beach, hi Rick, asked, related to structures, what are examples of both problematic and positive stories we live by following Stib or Stibby? I don't know how you say his last name.
Stibe, I think. I
Stibe?
always say
Okay, wow,
Stibe, but I could be wrong.
I was way off. Okay, we got 3
I could be wrong.
Anyone knows, help. Okay, but so yeah, Rick is wondering about the problematic and positive stories we live by that are shaping perceptions of the environment, and wonders, for example, the movie Don't Look Up as one example.
Yeah, so Don't Look Up. So there's this framework that Stibe, if I'm saying his name correctly, maybe Stibe, I really don't know. He talks about whether like certain, the way you talk about something, does it have a negative or a positive effect on the environment? And it's a very good discussion because there's a lot of pro-environmental messaging that actually, if you really dig deep, could be destructive. For example, discourses around green energy or clean economy, if those discourses are not addressing like the exploitation and extraction of minerals and what that impact on the earth is for clean technologies, that's not necessarily, that could be a destructive discourse. I would say Don't Look Up is an example of a constructive discourse, because what it's doing and what needs to happen is we need to have climate conversations. I didn't talk so much about the climate, but this has been my focus lately. The climate silence, or the spiral of silence, some of you may be familiar with this theory. People think that if no one else is talking about it, they shouldn't talk about it because they don't want to be socially isolated for bringing something up. And we don't have climate conversations in US culture in particular because the fossil fuel industry was very successful in spreading so much disinformation that it created confusion about whether climate change was really happening, if it was caused by humans, and who's at fault. And also there was such a strategic use of flack to attack people that tried to address it, that people just decided to be quiet. And so we can't solve these problems if we don't talk about them. So the film raises the climate conversation, and I know that some people didn't like it. They didn't appreciate the humor. I know that climate scientists generally really enjoyed it because they related to the experience of trying to penetrate this sort of gossip oriented media environment, and also this sort of very fragmented, polarized political situation, and not being able to actually solve the problem. And so I think the fact that this film, whether it's perfect or not, is not the issue. Is the fact that it created such a huge conversation, so important, and the fact that it's like the third most viewed film on Netflix indicates that people are really hungry to talk about this. And I'm actually writing a blog post about this as we speak, so I've been thinking about this. So I found the movie very productive. It definitely is missing certain aspects that need to be talked about in terms of the environment. I mean, I think that, Alex, you brought up important points about that we don't talk enough about the geology and the extraction aspects or the spatial aspects of media. And, in that film, the crisis is coming from outer space. And I mean, I think in some ways it's an appropriate metaphor because you know that this doom is coming, this disaster is going to come. You can kind of mark your calendars, but it's not extraterrestrial. It's from here. We're producing it. It's our system. And so there's a little bit of a critique of capitalism. There's a little bit of a critique of sort of the tech industry. The fact that they want to, instead of destroy this comet, I'm sorry, spoilers. They decide they're going to mine it for minerals for our devices. So in a sense, there's a kind of an ecomedia aspect to the film, which is great. It directs our attention to the fact that our devices need these minerals. And there is kind of a critique of the billionaire class. This character is kind of a hybrid of Bezos and Elon Musk and so forth. So that was useful, but it's hard to translate, the real damage caused by the fossil fuel industry is really, I would say, will go down as one of the greatest crimes in human history. And we haven't fully comprehended that or even brought that to the level of discourse that needs to be confronted. But this is a good starting point. By the way, I know we're supposed to go for an hour, but I'd be happy to stay over if you want.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great. We have, I know we have people from all over the world, from Europe, from the States, and so we don't want to push it like too long, maybe an extra 1 or 2 minutes. We have one question in the chat. So let's do this one. And this is Claire. She asks, as a writer, we all we have are words. Is it just as important to evoke emotions and interweave scientific facts? Do you have good examples of environmental literature? Like where we use words, but we also evoke emotions and interweave scientific
Yeah, so
facts?
that's such a great question because one of the reasons why people are failing to take action or unable to act on the climate is because facts aren't enough to motivate people. You know, people are motivated by emotions. And so climate communicators, I would recommend everyone get Juliet Corbett's book, Climate Communication. I mean, if you really want to, the answer, Claire, to your question is in that book. She spends a lot of time explaining the cognitive response to stories that people have, but in particular, we need to have good emotional stories that connect us, you know, that it's not going to be irrational, like a lot of environmental communication fails because it's all about trust the science, but that's not how people make decisions about their lives. And in fact, there was some interesting press recently. People were arguing that really, if you want to motivate people to address climate change, focus on the injustice story and the fact that, you know, that these fossil fuel companies have lied and have undermined people's health and undermined communities, and they have not, you know, to get people sort of riled up to sort of to not focus so much like, you know, this is the temperatures that are going up, this is the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but focus on, you know, that there's sort of like a villain in this story. I hate to use that word, but that there is kind of like a narrative structure, and that you know, there's Jeff and Richard wrote this book on climate and literature, and they talk about climate is a story, and so we have to be clear about what is that story, and tell that story, and it could be a fable. You know, I started my climate communication class reading Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And I would argue that the first chapter of that book, which is only 2 pages, is one of the most powerful pieces of environmental writing ever. And she creates this little, like a child fable. It's like a fable, but it's also like the Twilight Zone. It's like the Black Mirror, you know, like there's this town, people, and they're accustomed to sort of the fresh water and the insects and the birds and all that are sort of part of their environment. And then one day it's all gone. And it's like this kind of a shock, like what happened to all the birds? Where did they go? And it's such a new, those 2 pages are so powerful. I think that started the modern environmental movement, that her use of metaphor and her use of storytelling, it was a beautiful gift. And as far as, you know, actual literature, I'm not that, I would go to the Climate Lit website because there'll be lots of examples there, but I'm a big fan of cli-fi. I read a lot of climate science fiction. I don't think I have enough time sort of off the top of my head. It's hard for me to say names, but, you know, I really like Kim Stanley Robinson's work. He's a science fiction writer, but he writes a lot about climate. But I mean, I think that there's many more experts here on climate and environmental literature, but that was a very good question. Thank you, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Claire. Thank you, Antonio and Alex and everyone. I think we need to wrap this up. And of course, if you folks, if anyone has any follow-up questions to Antonio can be reached. I think there is Antonio's email address is in the event ad, and you can always reach out to us at Climate Lit. Please check the website for upcoming events. We will have another seminar, climate panel, I think in 3 weeks' time. But there are a couple of future events already scheduled for this spring. Please consider sharing your ideas and resources and publishing them on Climate-Led. That's exactly the idea for this website. Antonio, thank you so much. Alex and everyone, thank you. This was a wonderful session. And this was our first session in 2022. So, and it went so well that I hope the entire year goes really well for everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Have a good day.